He was really angry that I adapted so much, right? He kind of felt like I turned my back on our original family. He decided one day that the only way to make it a point of how angry he was to try and kill me. And so we go down and we go down the garage, and as we're going down there, he closes the door and he, wraps his like hands around my neck and starts.
Welcome to Intrepid Storytelling, where the brave, the courageous, the dauntless, and the resolutely fearless share their journeys of hope, grit, and transformation. These are the voices of the valiant, those who dare to rise, to dream, and to tell their truth out loud. Because every story has the power to inspire, and yours just might change the world. I'm your host, Deanna Powell. I am very excited to welcome Jay Barbanel today to Intrepid Storytelling. And I found Jay by reading his story. It touched me in such a deep and meaningful way. The story you wrote for I Am Adopted, the group on Facebook. And I don't know if they published that I Am Adopted story anywhere else, but that's where I found you, was on Facebook. Your story resonated with me because I have my own adopted children, and the way you wrote it, it was very, very meaningful. So I reached out and come to find out that the story is fairly new and it's ongoing. So we're going to get into that, but you're with us today because you are going to tell your story about being adopted and what that experience has been like for you. Yes?
Yeah, yes, I am. And thank you for
Awesome.
having me.
Do you want to talk about sort of who you are in a nutshell before we start with your childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me, and I'm super excited to be here. And thanks for giving me the space to tell my story. I think that every time I tell it, it helps me understand it more. So thank you. But yeah, so I'm Jay. Hi. I'm living here in LA, and I'm 36, and I just kind of found out my story. For a long time, I didn't know it, not because I was not curious about it, but just because I just didn't know that there were stories out there until I kind of came across all of it out of chance. And, I've spent the last year kind of really processing and trying to understand like a story that I literally had no idea about.
Yeah. And did you find that there are a lot more people that are adopted that probably have gone through similar experiences as you've kind of gone through the process of understanding your adoption and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that something that's been really, really special for me throughout this entire process was that it led me to looking for support. And I found people that are adopted that I've really connected with. And it's made me feel so much less alone to understand like there are people out there that understand the things that you're going through. Even though we all have such unique and different experiences, there are things that you just get. And it's really, really like special to have people around that understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And those of us who aren't adopted will never really understand as much as we try to love and support you. There's a place in your heart that we can't fill. But
Right. I agree with that. But I think that as adoptees, it's important for us to share our stories to people that don't necessarily feel them, because it just gives them insight, and it kind of allows them to understand a little bit more, maybe what they don't.
I love that. I love that. So speaking of, you tell me a little bit about your childhood. Do you remember how far back do you remember?
So to be completely honest with you, I really don't remember much of my pre-adoption life. I remember the orphanage a little bit. I can kind of remember like the layout. I don't remember the people that were there. Although now I've learned how special those people were when they took care of us. But my memories really are a little bit further in life. I don't really even remember meeting my parents for the first time. Luckily,
Wow.
we do have photos, but I was young. I was only 3 years old, so to remember a lot of it is hard. And I think that I also, because it was not a great environment, I think I also just kind of like blocked a lot of it out in order to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of like a survival tactic that I think a lot of us adoptees do.
Yeah, absolutely. And anybody who's gone through any kind of trauma, but even just living in an environment like that, probably, yeah, you're just kind of in survival mode and the brain survives in a certain mode.
Yeah, we were definitely in survival mode for the first few years of our lives. And I say we because I'm talking about myself and my brother, because my brother and I were adopted together. And he was like my rock, like my best friend, my my biggest support system, and we can get into it, but unfortunately that all shattered. So yeah, I
I
mean,
remember you talked about how he was the one who would tuck you in and tell you he loved you and gave you a hug and a kiss, and he was your person during those years.
yeah, I mean, I found this out later, but we were removed from our biological family out
Mm.
of a emergency state of abandonment by the government of Costa Rica. And so, he was 2 years older than me, and he had been through a lot of really hard things. And I think he tried to really protect me from those things. I mean, I experienced a little bit of the like child abuse and things like that, but for the most part, I think he really tried to guard me as much as he could. I mean, he was only 5 years old at the time, but he was treated like an adult, And so he kind of had the mentality of like, I'm going to protect my younger brother. But then that really shifted once we got adopted.
So, what age were you when you were removed from your home and then put in the orphanage? How long were you in the orphanage for?
We weren't there for that long, to be honest. I think it was something like 8 months. But we were in rough shape. We were in really rough shape. I went into the orphanage with a broken arm and two broken ribs. And that was due to my biological mother's boyfriend. My brother has like this like gnarly scar on his shoulder because he
Mm.
was, they took boiling water and just poured it all over him. So it was pretty intense. Yeah. So we were only there in the orphanage for a couple months or for 8 months or something like that. And then my parents came down, and we got introduced, and there was kind of this natural connection. And all I wanted at the time was just like a family. I just wanted like some love and some like what every child wants, right? And so once I got that, I was pretty much hooked, and I loved every second of it. Yeah, it was like the best thing ever.
So it was like the dream come true.
Yeah, it was finally like I finally had like that. I finally felt like I was wanted.
Yeah. Did you have any feelings of like miss my biological mom or boyfriend?
No.
No. Okay. All
um
right.
no.
I don't know. I only ask because even in some hard living environments, there's still like a longing or, just missing your mom. But you might have not ever gotten any kind of nurturing that you would have missed.
Right. Yeah. I definitely, I mean, I definitely never really, even in my entire life, I never had like any real feelings towards my biological mother. That being said, like I never knew anything about her until a year ago. And I don't really think that there was too much compassion or love there when I was born, just because she had already had, uh, I was the seventh one.
Oh, wow.
So she had already had, six other kids. And so I was just kind of like just another one that was around.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I see. Okay. So your parents come down, they take you home with them, you
Yeah.
and your brother. So what was life like in the US? Where did you grow up in LA?
No, so we went from Costa Rica to Boston. And so I think the reason why the story is going to get a little bit interesting is because adoptees, when we get adopted, we lose a lot, right? And we lose, I mean, some things that I lost at least were my culture, obviously the family that I was born into, my name. And so, yeah, so, I then had to go to Boston and adapt to that new lifestyle, right? With my brother. And thank God he was there. And it was really, I mean, we adapt really quickly, as adoptees because we have to, like we talked about before. And so going to Boston was cool. I was just like, all right, cool, let's do it. But then a couple years after we lived in Boston, my dad got relocated. And so we ended up moving to Belgium. And so now I'm kind of like, okay, now I have to learn a new language, and I have to learn a new culture, and I have to learn pretty much everything from scratch. And so, yeah, so after that, I must have been like five, I think. And we moved to Belgium. And I always kind of use a metaphor for the rain in Belgium. It rains a lot there. And that's kind of when, as a family, we really started seeing like the storm that my brother kind of brought with him. Because as I was really, really adapting to this new lifestyle, he was kind of doing the complete opposite. And he started really acting out, and there was a lot of miserable nights in the house because he was just out of control. And my parents were really, really, they saw what was going on, and they made it like their goal to try and help him as much as possible. But the reality was that he wasn't able to talk about what was happening. He was just, kind of like boiling up inside until he finally just like exploded. And that looked like the thing that really shifted everything was that I was seven and he was, no, I was six and he was set eight. And, he was really angry that I adapted so much, right? He kind of
Mm.
felt like I turned my back on our original family. And he's like, why are you like, why? It was like kind of a loyalty thing, right? And so he decided one day that the only way to make it a point of how angry he was to try and kill me.
Wow.
So yeah, so we were like hanging out, and he's like, "Hey, let's go ride bikes." We used to ride bikes all the time. That was like our thing, you know. And so we go down, and we go down the garage, and as we're going down there, he closes the door, and he, wraps his like hands around my neck and
Oh
starts
my.
like choking me out. And this, to be clear, this isn't like an older brother beating up a younger brother situation. Like there
Mhm.
was a lot of intention behind it, and the intention was strictly to kill me, you know? And he was just so angry because he was like, dude, like this isn't where we're supposed to be, you know? And you love it. And so thank God, like, when this is all happening, my mom just happened to open the door and kind of she's like saw this scene, and she was like, that's when it was kind of like, okay, this is a lot more than I think we really thought it was. And so they made it an effort to like bring him to the best doctors and the best therapists and truly understand what was happening. And after months of that, I was too young to really understand what was going on with my brother. I think that I kind of saw things happening, but I never really questioned it. I think I was just kind of like, he's sick and we're going to figure this out. But after months and months, the therapists finally got it out of him, and he talked about all the abuse and all the terrible things that he had experienced. And one thing that kind of grabbed their attention was that he finally said, look, I feel like I was taken away against my will from my country. And he's like, I really feel like I need to go back there to be home and to also protect my mom, from the abuse that she's facing. Now, this is a 9-year-old kid saying this, and so,
Yeah, and he remembers being 5, and so he has some of those memories too.
right. Yeah,
But yeah.
he remembered the abuse a lot, And so, that he basically said to the doctors, he's like, look, if I don't, if you guys don't figure this out, then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that Jay's life is just an absolute mess. And if that means I'm trying to kill him more, then I'm fine doing that, And so he basically just kind of gave them like, this is what's going to happen. And so through a lot of like conversation and obviously like a lot of really trying to understand, everyone across the board agreed that the best thing for both children and for the family was if he would to go back to Costa Rica. Now, as this is all happening, we as a family were asked to move to Barcelona.
Oh my goodness.
So, I think that, my parents really like kind of digested that and try to see what that would look like for us. And I think it kind of came at the perfect time, right? Because as we were all going through this huge event, there was change in location. And that kind of was like that new chapter opening up, right? And
Mhm.
so we decided to, move, or my parents decided to move to Spain. And so the summer of 96, we packed our bags and that's what we did. Now, the plan was basically for my mom and my uncle to bring my brother back to Costa Rica and kind of set him up. And then for my dad and I to stay in Barcelona together until my mom came back. And so we spent that summer together as a family of 4, and we did like a lot of really, really cool things together. And I think at times, like I even forgot that my brother was leaving, because I was having so much fun. Excuse me. And, I would forget that he was leaving, but then I would come home and I would see that like all of our stuff was unpacked, but his stuff wasn't. And it was just like those little memories of being like, okay, like I have to prepare for this, right? And so then that's when I was about to start school was when he was going to go back. And yeah, that day was like I remember the conversation we had the night before. I remember the ride to the airport to drop him off. It was a really, really hard time. Once he left, it was kind of like, all right. And it was kind of that adapting again. And I just had to like learn how to be by myself, even though I had my family, right? That
Yeah.
the last link to my previous life basically walked out of my life.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to adapt to that. And I did that very quickly. And
Do you
then
remember how you did, or was it something that you just told yourself?
yeah, I mean,
Because
I pretty
there's so many
much
people that, you know, I don't know, they wish they knew how to adapt better. And
sure.
adults wish they knew how to adapt a little bit better, you know? Do you remember how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I did it in the right way because I basically decided to compartmentalize it and I put it in a box over here and I was like, I'm never gonna talk about that ever again. And
Mm.
I asked my parents, I was like, once things kind of started settling down, I said, can we remove all the pictures of my brother? I never want to talk about it ever again. They were very adamant. They're like, hey, do you want to go to therapy? Do you want to talk to someone about this? And I said no, always, because in
Mm.
my mind, my brother went to therapy because he was sick. So if I go to therapy, does that mean that there's something wrong with me,
Mm.
right? And so
Mhm.
I completely compartmentalized it, and to the point where moving forward after that summer, no one knew that I had a brother. Like my friends, even to this day, like I saw one of my friends this past summer, like a really, really good friend of mine, and she and I had dinner, and she was like, "Oh, like what's up with the book? Like tell me about this book you're writing." And so I'm telling her the story, and she's looking at me, and she's like, "Dude, you've like never told me any of this." Like I didn't even know you had a brother, you know? So it was to that extent where I like completely hid it because
Mm.
that was the only way I was going to get through it, you know?
It makes sense.
Yeah,
It makes sense. Compartmentalizing is another, it can be a very healthy way to deal with stress,
sure.
right? And I remember a therapist at one point in my life, because I was just going through so many different things all at the same time. And she's like, okay, you know how like the TV back in the day, you could only like turn the knob one channel at a time. She's like,
Mhm.
you're only watching one channel at a time. You're doing this one, just thinking about this. Everything else is off. Then when you're ready, turn the channel, turn that thing off. You're on this. And that made a lot of sense to me. So
Yeah.
as a child, you were already doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely was. But the thing is that I guess I didn't move on. I never went back to understand it, you know, because I was too scared to, I think I was too scared and that it was going to be too hard to understand
Mm.
it. So yeah.
Sometimes when you stuff things down, did it manifest in any way? Like with your brother, probably was anger. Sometimes did you have any illnesses or anything like that nothing came out? There was, wow.
Surprisingly, and like I've talked to my mom about this, and I was like, "Hey, what was it like?" Like because I don't remember much, you know. And she said, she's like, "Dude, like you were super resilient, you know, and you just like there was no behavioral change. You know, there were times where I definitely was angry with my parents, but yeah, I basically just like I was just like, you know, I'd already been through so much, right, that
Mm.
I'd kind of put in the past that this was just kind of it just kind of felt like another one of those things that I was like, all right, well, it sucks that that happened, but you got to just keep on going, you know."
So you said so in 1996 is when your brother goes, and then you go to Barcelona.
Yeah, so we stayed in Barcelona and I lived there for 4 years.
Okay.
And, you know, it was kind of one of those things where it was a new culture. You know, I had already lost my Spanish, right? Because I hadn't been in Costa Rica for 7 years or for, I guess, whatever, how many years. And so I had to relearn Spanish. And thank God I did because it helped me out later in life and we'll get there. But yeah, so, you know, I think like that in itself, like moving around so much as a kid too was really, really hard in a way because I didn't know what I was supposed to, like where I was from. You know, like I mean I knew I was Costa Rican, but like I didn't know where in Costa Rica I was from. And so I
Yeah.
kind of was like, okay, am I from Boston? Am I from Belgium? Am I from Barcelona? Like I just didn't really know, you know. And
I bet a lot
so
of military kids feel that way.
I'm sure. I think they must, you know,
Yeah.
because you just kind of like I feel like sometimes I'm from Spain, and then like the World Cup comes around, I'm like, wait, why am I rooting for Belgium? You know what I mean? And so yeah, it was, you know, it was a little bit stressful, I think, at
Did
times,
your
but
mom ever do anything Costa Rican for you just as an homage to your culture or?
so Costa Rican, no. But you know, in my records, it does say that I was half native. And so when we were kids and we were living in the States, we would go to like powwows and things like that. And
That's cool.
it was never like forced, you know. It was always just like, hey, like this might be a little bit of roots for you, you know. But they also, you know, like they have their cultures, you know, and they just like kind of introduced me to those things. And I think it was really important for them to make me feel or to make sure I felt like I was part of it. So yeah, we didn't really do much like Costa Rican stuff. That was something that I never knew about
Mhm.
until as of very, very recent. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get there. So, at the time so you spent 4 years in Barcelona, what age were you then kind of at the end of that?
I
And
was
then
around 12
12?
when we came back to the States, yeah.
Okay. And then did you go back to Boston?
Yes, we went back to Boston. I spent high school there, and then, you know, art was always like a really, really big part of my life. And I think that's because, you know, Europe, there's so much culture and there's so much art. And my parents always wanted to expose me to those things. And so I kind of grasped onto art. And so after I was in Boston for high school, I ended up going down to Florida, you know, going to school down there, to an art school down there. And then after that, I went to New York, spent some time in New York, and then made my way west to LA.
So, did you go to an art institute in New
I
York?
did. Or no, I
Oh,
went to an art school in Florida.
oh, in Florida. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what were you studying?
I was studying photography.
Photography. Okay.
Yeah,
That
photography was
makes sense.
always like kind of the biggest thing in my life because I started shooting photos when I was really young,
Mm.
basically right when my brother left. And I think when I really think back about that, I think it was like my camera became my way of telling myself that I had things that made me safe, you know? And so I wanted to shoot like photograph those things as kind of like, look, dude, like you have proof that you're here and you're staying and everything's okay, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's like where my love for like true passion for photography started was just by like almost kind of taking care of myself through it.
Do you kind of feel like, okay, because correct me if I'm wrong, but as I interpret being adopted, it kind of feels like part of your identity is missing. You can't quite pin it down. And so photography sort of filled in a little bit of that identity gap for you because you were so good at it. You know, when you're good at something, you're like, yeah, I want to keep doing this. This is who
Sure.
I am, right? And your
Uh-huh.
artistic brain and how you express yourself and all of that, that's beautiful. I think that's amazing because, you know, like, not everybody also gets to really know what their passion is and then
Yeah.
do what their passion is,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I
So
think
that's
that,
wonderful.
to your point, like, yeah, identity has been something that has been a really, really big struggle of mine for a
Mm,
really long time until I recently understood what it meant for myself. And now, I know who I am and who I want to be for myself. But yeah, as an adoptee, I think, I don't want to speak for everybody that's adopted, but I think a lot of us really do have a problem and not a problem, but we wonder like, who are we? Because so much of that story is missing. It's like opening a book and starting in the middle.
mhm,
You lost all of that. You have no idea what's going on. And that's
mm,
not something like it doesn't matter if you're 6 months old when you're adopted. It doesn't matter if you're 6 days old, if you're six
right.
years old, whatever it is, there's always that missing piece. And I think a lot of us like always wonder.
So to that point, did you ever ask, or did your mom and dad ever sort of tell you a little bits and pieces of the things at least that they knew?
So
Was it an ongoing dialogue that, yeah, I'm adopted, and and it was, I'm proud of my story, or was it one day where they sat you down and said, you're adopted and here's all the things?
no, I mean, so I always knew I was adopted.
Okay.
Like I
Yeah,
went through the
good.
orphanage system, like my brother and I talked about it. But the reality is that, my parents were always very supportive.
Mm,
And they still to this day. And they always say to me, like, look, if you have any questions or if you ever want to talk about anything, please. And it was always like that. But the
good.
things that when my brother left, I was like, I don't want to talk about any of that, you
Mm,
know? And so I like didn't really ask questions. I knew a couple things, like I knew that I didn't know the extent of the abuse that we went through, but I knew there was abuse. I knew that I had other siblings out there. I
mm,
didn't find out later until much later how many there were.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it was always an open conversation. The door was always open. I just didn't want to go through it.
And from what I've learned from other adoptees, that is very common. Some
Yeah.
people want to know, they're very curious, and some people they just don't even want to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
it
And
takes time.
everybody's
I
different.
mean,
Yeah.
it's everyone's so different and it just takes time. And I think like whenever like an adoptee is ready, we kind of just know.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just happens. And then it just depends on how far you want to go with it.
Yeah. And how quickly.
And well, the
It's like a
pace of
fire
it,
hose.
the pace of, I mean, at least for me, like I learned everything in the course of like 3 days.
Man.
Yeah.
But it
And
was
like
probably exciting because you were ready.
it was exciting. It was really scary. And it was also, there was a lot of guilt that came with it. Yeah. Because I learned a lot about, my other siblings
Mm,
and I am really the only one that made it to where I am. And so there's actually 12 of us.
wow.
And so I, through a lot of like kind of detective work and asking for help, from a lot of people in Costa Rica, I ended up finding all of them.
That's
Not
amazing.
connecting with all of them, but at least finding all of their stories. But
Mm,
with it came a lot of guilt, and it took me a long time to kind of process and understand what happened to everybody.
mhm.
But
Wow. Well, we don't have to go through each one unless you want to. We have enough time, but so we're not there yet though. So you came back to the States, you go to school, New York, then you head out to LA. Was it for a job opportunity, or just you wanted to get a different kind of exposure for your art?
no, to be honest, I went through like a pretty bad relationship, like a
Oh,
pretty bad breakup, and I was like, oh, what am I gonna do? My parents had moved to LA, and so they were like, dude, you should just come out here and like, I think you're gonna love it. And that was 10 years ago, and so that was the reason why. And then my work just kind of happened to transfer to here. I was working actually representing artists. I was doing a lot of production work, and that transferred over to LA. So I was able to find a job really, really quickly, and then it just kind of clicked. But I don't think LA's forever. But for right now, it's like pretty good.
yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you get to LA. When were there any significant like relationships or friendships that really meant a lot to you along the way that you sort of helped shape your worldview, and just anything that you want to talk about as far as just
Yeah,
relationships with people?
yeah. There, of course, there were a couple things that really I think helped my life. and then some stuff that really changed my life, right? And I'll talk about the thing that helped me first. I have a really, really great group of friends, like a really, really strong support system. And I think that when my brother left, I always kind of really searched for that figure, like that sibling. And even though my friends didn't know about it, they always like, I mean, I have so many friends that I'm like, dude, it's like they're like a brother to me. And so those relationships like I cherish so much because they've supported me through so many things in life and challenges when they had no idea what was going on. And they were like, dude, you're just out of your mind. And I'm like, deep down, I'm like, no, I'm going through some crazy things right now.
Yeah.
And so those relationships are great. Like, I really, really value friendship and it makes me be a better friend.
Mm.
And then something that really changed my life was when I got divorced because I was getting divorced and this was a couple of years ago. And while I was going through the process, I remembered a conversation I had with my mom when I left New York, right? With that other relationship. And she said to me, she goes, I've always wondered how your past would affect your relationships. And when she first said that to me, I didn't really think about it. I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. But when I got divorced, I kind of went back and I thought about that conversation that I had. And that's when it clicked. And I was like, okay, like this isn't working. And I was like, there's not, like I said before, it's like I thought going to therapy meant I was sick or that there was something wrong with me. And when I kind of started thinking about these things, I was like, there's not something wrong with me, but there is something wrong. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to therapy and I'm gonna revisit everything that I put away when I was 7. And that was the focus. It wasn't about going back and understanding my pre-adoption life. It was going back and understanding how the separation with my brother affected me as an adult because I had never talked about it with anybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's where you started, was the separation from your brother?
Yeah,
Was
I went I
like
went
kind of day
to
one?
I went to therapy my goal was to just talk about that and it brought me to reconnecting with my family.
Wow, that is so cool. And over what kind of period of time? Were you just going once a week to the therapist and then?
Yeah, it was once a week. No. Yeah, it was once a week for an hour. But the thing is that like that's not where the work happens. A lot of people think like, oh, you go to therapy once an hour and that's it. At least
Mm.
for me, like I committed to changing myself,
Mhm.
right? And so that meant that I would go to therapy on Mondays, 7 p.m., right? 7 to 8. But that means for the rest of the week, I would take my time and be like, okay, let's really digest what we just talked about, understand the advice that I was given or the perspectives I was given, and really, really try to understand them and apply them to my life. And so the
Mhm.
work wasn't done like in the sessions, it was done outside in my own time. And I think that's a really important like point to make that it's not just about going in like once a week.
Right.
It's about like committing to it and really doing the hard work and facing the things that you don't want to face.
That's such a good lesson.
Buying or selling real estate isn't just a transaction, it's personal. And that's why I like to treat my clients like their family. I'm Deanna Powell with the Intrepid Home Team at Realty One Group, Orca Gold in Bellevue, Washington. With over 25 years of experience in negotiations, mortgage, title, and escrow, I deliver a true VIP client experience on every transaction, whether it's residential, luxury homes, or land. I listen first, negotiate fiercely, and protect your best interest every step of the way. With offices and partners in all 50 U.S. states, plus 30 different countries and territories around the world, you can be confident that your real estate needs will be met in every and any area you make your move. If you want expertise, integrity, and results, call me today, Deanna Powell, with the Intrepid Home Team, because every move deserves VIP treatment. I can be reached on my mobile phone 425-777-6998 or email me at team@intrepidhometeam.com. Or you can visit my website www.intrepidhometeam.com. That's spelled INTREPIDHOMETEAM.com.
When was the sort of the open door where you said, I'm going to go back to Costa Rica?
So the way that happened was it was kind of funny. So I'm writing this book, and I originally started writing about the separation between my brother and I.
Okay.
And so as I'm writing it, I was telling my therapist, I'm like, dude, it's so strange because I don't have any feeling towards myself as a child, right? I was like, I know I
Mm.
went through like some crazy things. I don't know what those things are, but like I don't really care. And my therapist kind of went, he's like, dude, okay. He's like, listen, we're gonna try and connect with like your inner child. And I kind of laughed and like rolled my eyes and I was like, okay, like here we've reached the point, you know, we've reached the inner child level of therapy. And I thought it was like so ridiculous. And I was like, dude, I'm not doing this. But then I kind of stopped and I was like, wait, okay. Like, and at this point, it had been about like a year and a half ish. And I was like, okay, wait, what if I actually do what he's saying, you know, and I try to do that? And I kind of surrendered to the idea that I thought, you know, I surrendered and stopped thinking it was stupid. Right. And so he had an assignment for me. He's like, hey, he's like, you know, I know you have all these photo albums. You're such a visual person. Go back and look at those photos and try to connect. It's like, all right, whatever. So I do that, you know, and I started to really kind of understand it, you know, and I did feel like I was connecting with that version of myself, but that was kind of it. And then it was around this time last year. My parents were out of town. They went like for a vacation. So I went to watch their house. I wasn't really working a lot. I was just kind of like hanging out. And so I said to myself, I was like, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. It's a great opportunity for me to go through these photos, remember things. It'll give me like, you know, a little bit of beef for my book and I'll get the details, you know? And so about a week and a half into my stay, I'm going through these boxes of images and something I thought was really interesting was like, you know, you see like from the day that my parents met me until the day that my brother left. And then when you go on, it's like it became a family of four and it came then to three, you know? And that really like seeing that evolution was really interesting. But anyway, so I'm kind of like sitting there going through these boxes and I see this other box. It was pretty big and it had like a worn out like piece of tape on it that said adoption files. And I was like, oh, I was like, okay, what's that about? You know? And so I was too scared to open it the first couple of days because I didn't know what was inside it. And so I didn't. I just kind of looked at it and I remember like kind of pacing around and being like, okay, do I do this? Do I not? Like what, you know, had no idea what was going to be in there. And then finally I was just like, all right, like you just have to do it, you know? And so I sat there for hours and I went through hundreds and hundreds of documents. And that's where like I found my first name that I was given. I never knew it, you know, but that was really interesting because I had done such a good job of connecting with that version of myself. And now I had a name to give that version. And so that was like a really special moment. And then,
What's the name?
you know, as much as I would love to tell you, I have to wait for my book to come out.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
So you're gonna have to
no,
wait.
Les,
You're gonna
you
have to wait.
order the book to find out his name.
Exactly.
I love it.
But you know, I think that it was really interesting to sit there and read these documents because it was reading a story about my life, you know, and that was so strange. And still, like, it took me a really long time to understand what I was reading was about me and to accept that, you know, because it was a lot of really like painful things to read. There was a lot of detail about
It was
what
like
was really
the CPS like reports and stuff. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was essentially like the reports from like the agency that took us, reports from therapists that first met us.
Yeah.
You know, it was a lot. And but through that, I ended up finding my biological mother's name. And I had never known that either, and her address. And so, you know, there were a lot of interviews with her, you know. And so I got to read kind of her voice in a way, you know, and I started to see her not as a mystery, but more as a person. And I understood why things happened the way they did, you know, like she had a terrible life. You know, she had 12 kids, started when she was like 15 years old, you know, and there was a lot of abandonment in her upbringing, and that just trickled down, right? It's generational trauma is really just what it was. So anyway, so I'm going through this box. I'm like, all right, I'm starting to understand kind of my life. And like I'm like, damn, I kind of just figured out my story that I never knew. And then I was like, what do I do with all of this? So I go on Instagram and just to like kind of rewind a second. At this point, I had reconnected with my brother.
Oh, how did that happen?
So yeah, let's go back for a second. When I was in Brooklyn, when I was living in Brooklyn, you know, I searched for him a lot when I was a kid. You know, even though I didn't talk about him, I missed him a lot, you know, and I always wondered where he was. I always wondered what he was doing and if he remembered me, you know, because we kind of made a promise to each other that we would always remember each other, you know. And so I was living in Brooklyn, and one night, or no, it was one morning, I just I would always type in his name in Facebook. Nothing would ever come up. And then it just kind of hit me. I'm like, dude, if he lives in Costa Rica, his name's probably in Spanish. So I searched it in Spanish. His profile popped right up.
Wow.
And so anyway, I ended up connecting with him. And we tried to build a relationship for 10 years, or I tried to build a relationship for 10 years. I found out what happened to him in his life, and, you know, I'll save that for the book. But he ended up having like a really, really hard life, full of like just terrible things. But he's figured it out so far, you know, as of now. And so at this point, you know, when I found this box, he's now back in my life. And so I said to him, I called him on FaceTime and I was like, hey man, like, you know, I know that you don't have any family, right? Like he basically wanders the world by himself. And I thought to myself, I was like, maybe I can find these people and I can bring you back to them, and we can go through this together and we can get closure and I can do something for you, And he was like, yeah, cool, whatever. And he was like so nonchalant about it. And I'm like, okay, dude, like I'm gonna figure this out. And so I go on Instagram and I type in the this town that I'm from, right? Now I had never known the name. It's called Tejarcillos. I never knew I was from there. And so I go through the Instagram geotag, right? And so I'm kind of like, not only am I searching for something, but I'm also starting to learn where I'm from, right? And it's a pretty dangerous, like, it's a barrio and it's like a pretty dangerous place. So I'm going through these images. I'm kind of thinking like maybe like I'll recognize somebody or maybe somebody will look like me. And maybe that's how I'm going to find my family. And so I spent hours doing that. I went through hundreds and hundreds of photos and nothing. I had found nothing. But I did find this guy, this American dude that lived down there in Tejarcillos. So I reached out to him. I wrote to him, I'm like, hey, man, this is my story. Can you help me? Didn't hear a response. So I'm like, all right, cool. Cut to like 3 months later, he finally reaches back out to me. And he's like, hey, Jay, he's like, funny enough, like I read your message and I totally thought that you were like a scammer. And so I like just ignored it. And but something drew me to writing to you. And now I'm curious about what how I can help. So I'm like, okay, cool. And so I kind of start talking to him and he's like, he runs an organization down there called Barrios of Hope, and they basically help kids in Tejarcillos and they like introduce them to martial arts and all this like really, really positive things. And so he said to me, he goes, if you have any names, we can look in our database because we are constantly researching people and we can try and help you. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. So I sent him the name, I sent him the address. Crazy. He lived like 500 yards from the address that I had.
Whoa.
Yeah. I was like, okay. And so he hits me back like 2 hours later. And he's like, hey, Jay, he's like, I do have some things to tell you. First thing is that your mom's dead. I was like, okay. He's like, there's no record of how it happened, but I see that she died in 1996. And I looked at it and it was 2 months after my brother went back. So he never found her. And so my connection says to me, he goes, hey, man, he goes, the good thing is though, here listed, I have 4 of your siblings. I have their names, their birthdays, and their identification numbers. Wow. He's like, so here's the information I got for you. You do with it what you'd like. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to try and find them. And he goes, okay, well, you're only going to be able to find 3 of them because one of them died when he was 3 months old. So I'm like, okay, copy that. And then he said to me, he goes, what I suggest is you put a flyer, you design a flyer, you put a little bit of your story on it, put their names and their date and their birth dates, and you put that out to these 3 different places on Facebook in Costa Rica. And you ask for help because he goes, Costa Ricans, they help each other. And so if you ask for help, they will help you and you're going to find your family. I'm like, okay, I'm like, let's do it. So I designed this flyer, I put it out there, and I lie to you not, like I put it out on like an evening, and the next morning, over 300 people reached out to me. And they were like, hey, man. And a lot of them were like, look, I can't help you. But they're like, look, like you're one of us. And I just pray for you. And I hope that everything's going to be all right. And I really hope you find your family. And just having that support, like, even though they couldn't give me leads, just the support alone and having a bunch of people be like, hey, you're Costa Rican, just made me feel so good because it was something I always wanted, right? I never had any connection to my home. And they offered that. And so throughout this process, this
Your
one
community.
Woman, it was my
right?
community, yeah.
Community.
And it was a community that I lost when I was 3 years old,
Right. And part of your identity.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome.
So then I get this message from this woman. She's like, hey, she was this older woman and she was like, I really want to help you. I don't have any information, but here's my phone number. If you just want to talk or whatever, if you need like to know how things work down here, call me. And so I called her and she became like a friend, and we started talking a lot, and we were kind of like, I was looking for my older sister, and then I was looking for my younger sister and my younger brother. And I found my younger brother on Facebook, but I never got to connect with him. So then while this is all happening, another woman reached out to me. She's like, hey, she's like, I can't really tell you. I don't want to tell you much about me, but I work I have this job that I have a database, and here's your older sister's information. Here's her number. Here's her email. I called her. She wants to talk to you. Go talk to her. And I was like, okay. I'm like, cool. So I called her up. We connected. We talked for a couple of days, but the reality was that she had a really, really hard life, and she wasn't looking for me the way I was looking for her. She also had 18 other siblings. And so she was like, whatever, dude, like you're just kind of another one. And so as much as I wanted that connection to work, she basically was like, I'm out. And so I was like, okay. And I understood it. I don't hold that against her. But then I continued my search. And, throughout this entire process, there was one name that I found when I had the list of siblings that I really wanted to find. And there was just like something inside that I was like, I really need to connect with her. But I couldn't find anything about her. And so I was like, wow. I was like, how is it that I can find everybody else, but I can't find her? So I'm on the phone with my friend now, who's kind of like my boots on the ground, if you'd say. And I'm telling her this theory. I'm like, it's so strange because I can't find her, And I really want to connect with her. Like she was like a year younger than me. And she's the only one that had the same two last names as me. So in my mind, I'm like, she must have been like because we all have different fathers, I was like, I think she might have been the only like fully biological one. And I really need to find her. And so this woman says to me, she goes, Jay, I've really been thinking about this. What was the name of the baby that died? So I told her. She goes, do you know what his father's name was? So I told her, and she goes, man, it's so strange, and this is such a weird coincidence. But I remember 30 years ago being in Tarsios, helping a woman that had your mom's name, that had all these kids, and I remember having a baby that died at 3 months old, and the boyfriend's name was this, and blah blah blah. And she goes, and one day I went there, and she was really really upset, and I asked her why she was so upset, and she said to me that the day before she had to sell one of her daughters for her boyfriend's bail money.
My God.
And she said, so my friend said to me, she goes, so I hate to have to be the one to tell you this news, right? But I think that's probably why you can't find her.
Wow.
And that like destroyed me.
Wow.
It was really, really hard to hear that. And it's still really hard to think about and process. But when that happened, I got off the phone with her and I called my mom. And I told her the story, and my mom was like, dude, this is so crazy. By the way, my mom doesn't call me dude. I know she's going to listen to this and be like, I did not call you dude.
I did not say dude. That's
so I just want to clarify that. Sorry. So
my daughter just called me bro the other night, and I'm like, what the heck did you just
like,
call me?
I just have to get that anyway. So I call her and she's like, hey, and I tell her the story and she goes, it's crazy that you're telling me this because I do remember being in the orphanage and them telling me that your biological mom had to sell one of her daughters. And so that basically, it legitimized this woman's story, And so I always think, I'm like, it's just so crazy that somehow in this whole process, I found someone that knew my biological mom, and who told me the story. So anyway.
Probably the closest connection to her besides your siblings.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So while this is all happening now, this is like day 2, of like all getting all this information. And I'm like out of my mind at this point. And so I called my brother and I was like, hey, dude, like this is all the information that I have, And as I'm telling him these stories, he's like finishing my sentences for me.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, I look at him, I'm like, wait, I finally was like, wait, like, how do you know about all this? And he just kind of like smiled and like laughed. And I was like, dude, you've known about this the entire time, huh? And he knew how important it was to me to find these people and to like my entire life. He knew how important it was. And he basically said to me, he goes, I've known about this since the day I met you again. And I never told you because this is the power that I have over you.
Oh my goodness.
And so I was like, okay. And so that felt like another betrayal from him. And that mentality of like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make Jay's life miserable that he had when he was 9, it just made me realize that never changed and it never is going to change. So I ended up having to walk away from him. And so I no longer talk to him. And that's really hard because like, I still really, really love him. And I check in on him on Facebook and I like try to follow along to an extent. I think at some point I'm going to have to just completely let go, but I'm not ready for that yet.
Well, and if you can compartmentalize it a little bit, to use that word again, but you cherish the tender and the warm and the happy moments that you had, the experiences that you had, the relationship that you had with him. But just because you have to put some healthy boundaries between you and the toxic part that is unhealthy between the two of you, it doesn't take away from the fact that you love him. You just, you can't have that in your life. It's not healthy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I still struggle with it. And it's, like I said, it's still really hard, but it's something that I understand that I have to do for myself. So at this point in this kind of 3 days of searching, I never, I didn't touch base with my younger brother, but I could see in his photos that there was a lot of struggle that had happened in his life. And I knew that his dad was the boyfriend that my mom had that was like super abusive, And so I kind of said to myself, I'm like, maybe that world was supposed to be left in the past. And maybe I'm not supposed to re-enter that, So I kind of decided, I was like, I'm going to stop searching. So I just stopped. But I left the posts up, just in case, whatever. And I just kind of started to process and I started to kind of try to get back to myself. And, I went to my therapy sessions and I continued my work and tried to just kind of find my peace again. Right. And then like 3 weeks later, something like that, I get a message on Instagram. And this woman says to me, she goes, hey, I think I saw your post on Facebook. I think you might be my brother. And I was like, I'm usually the one that sends that message, you know? Like, what do you mean? And so she sent me like all of her paperwork, and she ended up being the 12th sibling, my youngest sibling, but she was never listed on the paperwork because the Costa Rican system is so like insane. And so it was never documented. We ended up like, the day that we connected, we jumped on FaceTime, and she was like so nervous. And I had already done this before. Like I had already connected with my brother 10 or 15 years prior, 10 years prior. So I
Mhm.
knew like the emotion that goes through you when you reconnect with somebody. And so I kind of like calmed her down, and I was like, all right, like everything's all right. Like, is this how you're feeling? She's like, that's exactly how I'm feeling. I'm like, all right,
Mm.
it's gonna be okay. And so since that day, that was in April of this year. And we basically, my younger sister and I decided like, look, she had a really hard life herself, and she knew there were others out there, but she never knew if she'd ever find them. And she was searching for what I was searching for, right? And that was that connection. She actually grew up with my younger brother that I was looking for. A lot of things happened there. And again, I'll save that for the book too. But she no longer talks to him. But she and I committed to really building and nurturing a relationship. She has these two little kids, my niece and my nephew, and a boyfriend that she lives with. And so finally she said to me, she was like, hey, do you want to come down to Costa Rica and like we can hang out? Now going back to Costa Rica was like my biggest fear because so many like terrible, terrible things happened there. And I didn't know how I was going to react like physically. I didn't know how emotionally I was going to react. But I finally said, I was like, I think that I'm at the point now where I'll never be more ready to go home. So I just got to do it. And so yeah, I got back in early November, so it's still pretty new. But yeah, I went back to Costa Rica for the first time, and I connected with my sister. I stayed with her for the week, and that's why I said earlier, like, thank God that I learned Spanish and I remembered Spanish from Spain because I can fully communicate with her.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, and it's been like the most like I tell her all the time, I'm like, I would go through every single thing I went through in my life if it
Mhm.
means that at the end of it, I get to connect with her. And I truly mean that. Like I would go through all of it 100 times over, a million times over if this is
Mhm.
where I end up,
That's
because
beautiful.
it's been this most special relationship that I've ever had in my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's your sibling, even the sibling that you had a special relationship with your brother, even though he wanted to kill you, but like this is another sibling, that really you grew up most of your childhood without any siblings.
Right. Yeah.
So here you have a sibling and that closeness is just awesome. But I do probably want to say too that, you know, even if you had grown up with all 12
Mhm.
siblings together, you still would not have been close with every single one
Right.
because
Of
there's so
course.
many, so much age. So it kind of makes sense. And in that regard, you might not, you know, yeah, not to feel too bad about it, but I guess I'm just
Right.
trying to give you a pep talk.
No, that's all right.
It's like you're not going to be close with all of them.
No, for sure. And
But
I agree with that
yeah,
100%. And
yeah.
it's yeah,
But
it's it
12 siblings. And I have to
yeah.
say, isn't it interesting? My son, my youngest, he has also, I think it's 12. He's one of 12.
Mhm.
And same dad of all the same dad.
Got it.
Yeah. So he always asks me to look at pictures and stuff. And all I have are pictures on Facebook that his
Mhm.
dad has sent to me. I've reached out to a few of them just to say, hey, you have a brother and do you want to, connect? And I'm totally open to having that kind of a relationship.
Yeah.
So that you guys can know each other growing up, but nobody's responded yet. It's just the way it is.
It
But
takes a second, I think.
yeah,
And
no
on their side
pressure.
too. On their side too, it's like I think
Yes.
receiving that message is probably just like, oh wow.
Right, right. Well, and oh, there's so much that goes into it. The relationship with, Trey's dad, and then each of the women that he has, it didn't end well.
Yeah.
That's how it didn't end well in a lot of scenarios. And so they look at anything that's connected to him as a negative. And it's really
Sure.
sad because that's not who Trey is. But, he's one day I feel like, and when he's ready, never any pressure, but when he's ready, I'm going to just like go crazy, try to help him find whoever he
Yeah.
wants to find, whatever I can do to help him.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. And it's something that like, I mean, some adoptees don't need to do that. But for the ones of us that do, it's like once you get that connection, it's just, I mean, it just like it fills such a hole in the heart that we have.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever like cures it. It doesn't, but it like patches it really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
And
at least like some puzzle pieces start to come together,
yeah,
right? So now
for
it feels
sure.
a little bit more secure instead of just kind of floating around going and in a continuous curiosity, a state of curiosity and wonderment.
For
Like
sure.
what's going, yeah.
And it's also like, I think one of the really cool things too, like with meeting my sister was, I don't look like anybody in my family,
Yeah.
and that's something that I always have thought about, because like my cousins, they all have like, they all have some kind of like similar thing, and I had that a little bit with my brother, like we kind of looked alike in a sense, but it always bothered me, right? And then meeting my sister, like she and I look very much alike. And when she would introduce me to her friends or to her like her work people, they'd be like, "Oh my God, like of course you guys are siblings, like you look exactly the same."
Like
And like,
twins.
yeah, and seriously, I mean, even though she's like 4 years younger than me, like we really do look so much alike, and that was a really special thing. Like I loved that part of it. And like my nephew, like I have pictures of myself when I was 3 years old, and he looks like those pictures.
Oh.
He's 4. And that was kind of surreal too, like being there with him because that's how old I was when I left essentially, right? And so like kind of walking around with him, it was kind of seeing like almost seeing myself, like that version of myself that I'd reconnected with. And that was such a beautiful thing for me. Like I really, really needed that.
Did you have I don't know if you might have been aware of this, but did any of the sounds or the smells or the things that you like, even roads you walk down, did any of them feel familiar to you?
Yeah, there was this like kind of strange feeling of I was like, I know I've been here before, but I also know I haven't been here before.
Right.
It wasn't really like it wasn't a specific smell or specific sight. It was just kind of like it was just something. It was like an
Just
energy.
a
I don't know.
familiarity.
Yeah, there was a strange familiarity the entire time, and I
And
loved it.
it
I
felt
mean,
like home or felt just familiar?
no, I mean, I can now call Costa Rica home again.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's
And I
great.
think I will forever. That's where I'm from.
Mhm.
And I'm very proud to be from there. The people are like they're very, very they're very caring and they're very empathetic and they really do live to help each other. And that's rooted very deep inside of myself. And I think ever since I left there, I've kind of made a purpose to be like, that's where I'm from and that is how I am. So yeah.
Well, you've probably been that way your whole life.
Yeah, and I
You
agree with
never
that.
really knew where it came from, and now you do.
Yeah, and I think that like I put my guard up and I was like I'm from Boston, like don't mess with me. But like that wasn't true to who I was. That was
Yeah,
just like me kind of safeguarding because then I didn't have to explain anything. You know what
sure.
I mean? And so once I was
You look Italian from Boston.
yeah, I'm like, get out of here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so going back to Costa Rica, it was like, I mean, it was the best thing I ever did for myself. I absolutely fell in love with it. I'm going back in April. I'm going to surprise my sister for her birthday. She doesn't speak English, so she won't be able to understand this. Uh, so I won't give it away. But yeah, I'm going back in April to surprise her, and I'm super, super excited to go back.
That's amazing. When exactly was it that you started writing your book? Because you were writing the book about your reconnection with or the separation from your brother. And that was part of your therapy. Was that something that your therapist suggested you do, is write a book?
No, actually, I didn't know it yet, but I started writing my book when I was in Brooklyn 10 years ago in
Okay.
2025. No, it's
Wow.
2025 now. In 2015, I'm sorry. I had a family member who I'm really close to, an aunt of mine, and she's someone that I always felt really comfortable talking about these things with. And she said to me then, she's like, "Dude, you have such like a unique story. You should write a book about it." And I was like, "All right, whatever." And so when I reconnected with my brother, I sat down and I tried to write, and I wrote like 2 pages. And then I was like, "Dude, no one cares about this, and I don't even know the story, so like, I'm not going to do this." And then once I started going to therapy and like I really started to understand things, I wanted to write a book about my experience and how therapy helped me. That's all it was about. And so I started writing my book. And so, I basically take you into my first session. And that's kind of where I open up about kind of what happened with my brother. But then through that experience, like through doing all the work and understanding the story more, I finally had a voice to talk. And so that's how the book finally evolved. Like it had 3 different titles because it was 3 different stages of my evolution. At first it was called Eating Alone because that's kind of what it felt like when I had to really look inward. Then it
Mm.
was called Thank You for Listening because as I started to listen to myself, it allowed me to be vulnerable and talk to other people. And I learned that by doing that, it allows them to open up as well. Like I saw a lot of people being like, okay, you just shared like some pretty crazy things. This is what I went through. And so, and I loved that. So it became Thank You for Listening. And then as I started searching, and that's what the book starts to really become about, that's when I titled it Finding Tico.
Nice. So Yeah, if you ever start a podcast, you should call it Thank You for Listening.
There
I
you
wonder
go.
if there's anyone out there already has that name. We'll have to check it
Yeah, we'll have to check
before
that.
we launch this one, just in case, because you never know. Like you have such a unique perspective for people who have been adopted. That would be a cool thing to put together.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it, you know.
Really? It's
Yeah.
awesome. What would you say is the hardest part of the process that you've gone through? Would you say I'll let you answer. I'm not going to try to put words in your mouth. What's the hardest part? And what I'm going to ask next is how did you get through that?
Got it. I guess I think the hardest thing I ever went through was saying goodbye to my brother, right? That was the worst day of my life, you know? Like it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I think just to get to where I am now, like admitting to myself and telling myself like, look, I want to get better, right? I want to introduce myself to the real version of myself. That was hard to do, you know, because it was sitting in a lot of sessions and just pouring this all out and talking about things that are super uncomfortable and things that are really, really tough to look back on. And then continuing, you know, I could have stopped at any point, but I knew I had to keep going because I knew that there was something at the end of that, I guess, the tunnel, you know? So that was really hard. There were times where I was like, I've learned enough. I don't want to know anymore, you know, about myself. And then, it's hard to commit and to do those things.
And maybe you were just done for that day.
Yeah.
A little time.
I was like, I need a second, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's so good because I also think about people who maybe aren't adopted, but they still need to go to therapy and they also need to find themselves because maybe they've lost themselves along the way in addiction or codependency or what have you, you know, when you lose yourself, it does take work to find you again. And then also realize that the next chapter is something I get to write.
Right. Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And I get to write it with all the tools and all the knowledge and all the experiences that I've had up to this point. And now I get to write the next chapter. And I think it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think taking the reins on yourself, you know, and being like, I'm going to drive this car now, you know, that's I mean, I think everybody should go to therapy, you know, I'm like everybody needs to do this in their life. But, I think that when you do, finally take hold and you kind of find yourself and all that. It's the most beautiful thing ever, you know?
Yeah, I love that. Well, how old are you now?
I'm 36.
36. Okay. Yeah. So as a 36-year-old, what would you say is your, because you have so much more life to live and maybe you come back in another 30 years and you tell the rest of the story, this was the second half of my life, but it's such an exciting time for you. And you've learned already in such a short period of time, of a lifetime, so many really good lessons for people of all ages. What would you say is your life message, or any kind of advice you could give anyone other than, everybody should go to therapy?
Sure. It's a good question. I think that, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, is that I mean, I felt lost for a really long time, and I didn't know I was lost. And I think that it's okay to feel lost and it's okay to be really confused and it's okay to be not yourself, there's nothing wrong with being in a spot where things are confusing, and completely losing yourself is completely okay, but it's how you come back. You know what I mean? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. And I think you said it before. Some people might think, and particularly in anyone who's been adopted, that, oh, there's something wrong with me, but it wasn't that there was anything wrong with you. There was just something wrong. And that is such a powerful phrase because you don't have to internalize everything that negative that's going on around you. It doesn't have anything to do with you, but you do have the power to change it if you want to.
There's always and it's also never too late, it's never too late to be like, you know what? I want to change this, and I think another thing it's do the things that scare you, in the past 2 years, I've faced every big fear that I had, head on, and it's super uncomfortable to do, but face your fears. That is what's going to free you, and then ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. In order to find my family, I had to ask an entire country to help me. And a lot of them did, a lot of them did help me. And so, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's never too late to change and, face the fears.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. It's so inspirational.
Yeah, I think, that's amazing. That's what worked for me. And so I just hope that other people can listen and try it out.
Can I ask also one more question? And I remember I wanted to ask you this.
Of course.
The parents who raised you absolutely love you. You love them. So you guys have a great relationship. But something that they did right that you can say, to other adoptive parents that are just wondering, am I doing this right? What's something that you appreciate them doing for you?
They always fully supported anything that I needed. They were always very honest with me about anything. And so, yeah, and they never like forced anything, They were never like, hey, go find your family. Or like, hey, you can't find your family. It was just like, whenever you're ready, do what you got to do, and we're going to be here like rooting for you. We're going to be here to support you, everything, like they were so good about letting me find myself and not worrying about what that was going to mean for them, because when I did find my family, like there was a little bit of weirdness for a second. They were like, does this now mean that you're going to want to go back there? Or like, does this mean that we're going to lose you? And it was I felt like it was my responsibility to tell them like, look, I'm still here and I'm still present. You guys are still my people. I just now have this other extension. But the biggest thing that they did for me was they always supported me and always just they loved me so much. And
Do they have a relationship with your biological family?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Just curious.
There's no relationship there, but it was cool because I did FaceTime my sister and I introduced them.
Oh, cool.
And I was kind of like the middle I had to translate. But yeah, I hope one day, like I really hope one day I can bring her here and introduce them, And it was cool because like my mom even said like when I found my sister and I was so excited and she was like she could tell, she was like, oh, she's like, I wish that she had been there too, She's like, because we would have taken her too. And I was like, there's nothing I wish more,
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Well, and it's not like you would go from one family to the other. It's just that your family expanded.
Yeah.
And there's more people who love you and for more people for you to love.
For sure.
Really. Yeah.
For sure. And that's how it feels. And, my sister and I talk every single day.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's the best thing ever.
So cool. Oh, I just love that. Yeah. Is there something that you would warn adoptive parents if you don't want to make it harder on yourself? Don't do these things. Is there any really specific things that you would say, don't do this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a really big one before even adopting is understanding what you're taking on. It's not like, hey, I have a kid now. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be great. There's a lot of messy things that come with adoption. So I think the first thing is understand what you're really committing to and be okay with that. Because there's a tremendous amount of trauma that we as adoptees go through. Right. And that's kind of what I said earlier. Like, it doesn't matter what age you're adopted. It always stays with you. And we're all going to deal with it in very different ways. So you have to prepare, I don't have kids, but you have to prepare yourself for that,
Well, you could adopt a baby, maybe that's gone through trauma, grows up to have anger issues.
Right.
Because you never know what could manifest, or adopt a baby, or even a teenager, and they could be absolutely like the perfect child.
Right. Yeah. You never know. You never know.
You never know.
But I think also, I mean, one thing I do want to say too is like, I think that people that are looking to adopt or that want to adopt, you're doing such a disservice if you do not allow your child to know what happened. You know what I mean? I have some friends that are adopted that their families refuse to give them the information. And, they've now walked away from their families and been like, you're not like, I'm not part of your family, and I understand why.
It feels like a betrayal, right?
It feels like a betrayal. And I understand why people do it. Don't get me wrong. Like, people are scared that they're going to lose their child, right? I get it. But you're doing so much like danger to the child by not giving them that, that's like the biggest thing. It's like, you can't hold the information, and no matter how.
It feels like a betrayal, and it feels like you've been lied to your whole life.
Right. And it's like, it does, like some of the excuses you hear, it's like, oh, well, like you're not going to like what you're going to hear,
Yeah, but that's not.
You still got to hear it,
Yeah.
I didn't really like
it's going to come out eventually.
Yeah. Like, I didn't like the stuff I read, like it was really hard to read, but I'm very glad I know.
And what I've heard also, and just because I did so much, even before I became a foster mom and then ended up adopting, I did so much. Like, I was in chat rooms and asking questions and, what does a child that's been adopted feel like when, whatever kind of scenario it is. But I lost my train of thought. But basically, I think that that's the key too, is that do your research, find out, make sure that you're not just adopting a child because you want a kid. you
Right.
know, like this is my, you know, and then I'm going to raise them the way I want to raise them. And they're going to have my identity and my,
Right.
you know, everything. And they don't need to know anything about their background. They can just go and do that when they turn 18.
Right. Yeah,
It's
that's not the
oh,
way to go about it.
and I know what I was saying. A lot of the people that said it is that if the earlier you can tell the person that they're adopted, their story, it normalizes it. And even though it might have been traumatic, you know, at the time, or something that they might not want to hear, if they've been hearing it all along, then
It
it's
makes it a
not
little bit
really
more
going to be
normal.
news to them later on. Right.
For
Yeah.
sure. I think, you know, that I'm kind of trying to start, the wheels are spinning. I think that doing your research, not only on the adoption, what that means, but also
Mhm.
on the agencies that you work with,
Mhm.
especially in international adoption,
Mhm.
because there's a whole different world that is extremely corrupt where babies are getting sold for adoption, right? And so I think that's really important, is just to do your research on who you're talking to and who you're adopting from, because there's a whole industry, you know.
Oh yeah. 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 My cousins adopted from Ethiopia. And I think it took years. It wasn't even
Oh
just
yeah, I
months,
bet.
but it was years. They were going back and forth and staying there and paying more money. And what else do you need? I thought this was going to be done by, well, we need more money. It's like, gosh.
It's a whole industry.
But yeah, well, it's also a beautiful option when the motives are right and there's enough love to give. And when we put the children first, it can be a very beautiful thing too. So, you know, because there's a lot of kids that need people who will adopt, especially for the right reasons.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I say it all the time, like my parents saved my life, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet.
They really did. If it wasn't for them, like I don't know, you know, I have an idea of what would have happened to me, but you know.
Well, yeah. And we don't have to talk about that, but well, I'm certainly glad your parents saved your life.
Thank you. Me too.
Because look at what a beautiful person you are.
Oh, thank
You're
you. Thank you so
producing your
much.
art and you're telling your story, and it's going to save lives. It's going to save, you know, a lot of adoptees, especially when they feel alone, you know, and when you share your story like this and they feel like, oh my gosh, that's like he's speaking my story right now, it takes away some of that despair, you know? And there's a lot of kids out there just think like I'm so lost. And, you know, and if they ever felt like they didn't belong on earth for any reason, that would just break my heart.
Yeah.
So I feel like you telling your story and saying, you know, you can get through this and go to therapy. It's going to do the hard thing. Here's how you compartmentalize. All of these things are such wonderful lessons for people to learn, and especially other adoptees. And I hope just as many of them get to hear this as possible and get to read your book and all of the things that you end up doing with the rest of your life. I think it's just going to be incredible. I can't wait to watch what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that.
And you
Yeah,
have
you know,
a friend in me. Anytime you ever need somebody to
thank
talk
you.
to or whatever, anybody to support you, I'm 100% here for you.
I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, it's, you know, the book is not about my story, you know. I have to tell my story I have to tell the story, but the book is it's for anybody that feels really, really lost and doesn't know that there are other people out there that feel the same way, whether you're adopted or not, you know. It's just that's why I wrote it.
Amazing. I love that. And it's called Finding Tico.
Finding Tico, yeah.
Finding Tico. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the show notes, I'm going to put a link to where they can go and purchase the book. Is it going to be on your website?
Yeah. So if you go to findingtico.com, the book is going to be out in April. I'll have it there. And then, yeah. So mainly
Are you doing pre-orders?
I'm not doing pre-orders yet.
Okay.
I'm gonna hold off on that for a second, but there will be. And then
subscribe. Maybe they can subscribe to like something on your website, or just find you on Instagram when you'll be making those announcements when the book will be.
Yeah, so on Instagram, ready. It's just like finding_Tico. And so I started kind of like doing updates there. Yeah, once we start getting a little bit closer to the day, there'll be like subscriptions and pre-orders and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been a major pleasure, and I hope you'll stay in touch. Maybe even one of these days we'll do like a live Q&A and where people can ask you questions if you're willing
awesome.
to answer
that'd
those.
Be super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you. Really. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
If today's story moved or inspired you, please take a moment to share this episode with someone who needs a spark of courage. Your 5-star rating and short review help these brave, courageous, and resolutely fearless stories reach even more hearts. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an episode of Intrepid Storytelling. Thanks for listening.